I'll call the meeting of the Light Board Advisory Committee to order. It's Wednesday, July 8th, 7:30 a.m. And thank you, Dave, for agreeing to take the minutes. Much appreciated. Our minute taker has gone to Canada, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for him. I should also mention at the outset that Michael McRae, his term was up at the end of June, and he's been sentenced, appointed, to another 3-year term. So with that, I guess we can dive in. And the first agenda item is the governance. And I know that's been kicked around for a long time. Ralph and Bob, I think you have been through most of that. And Chris has teed it up with the research that Aiden has done recently. So I don't know, Chris, if you want to, the idea today, my idea anyway, was at least to have a full discussion about the idea of a independent governing board and take a roll call vote on that and hopefully send that off to the Light Board, Roy, for their meeting next Monday, I believe.
Okay.
And I hope that governance would be on the agenda for that meeting. And then we can go on further and talk about some more of the specifics of governance if that's the way things go. There's a lot of details. You could do appointed versus selected boards, 3 members versus 5-member boards, and so forth. So, and I guess we could also talk about the timing that we might, if there was to be a change, what we might propose. So with that, I'll just ask if people had an opportunity to see the attachment that was attached to the agenda on the governance reform goals. And maybe I should turn to Ralph and Bob first, because you've been through this a lot. I know you've been on some of the study committees, Ralph, that have proposed governance changes.
Well, Steve, before you do that, could I ask you who drafted the Light Governance Reform Goals 2-pager?
I did.
Okay.
Ralph, you're muted. There you go.
Okay, thanks. I've been watching this for a long time, going back to the time when the original Light Advisory Board was appointed. And at that point, I was on the warrant committee. And I think that the selectmen at the time had a pretty clear goal of what they would like to do. They were quite sure they could not fully understand the complexity of running a light department in that time period. And so they appointed this other board, and I suspect with the long-term intention of that board taking over that function. At the time it happened, however, I can remember some members of the selectmen coming to me and saying, well, it's nice that we have this board, but we still want to be in control of a whole lot of things, including salaries and other issues. And we're concerned about the salaries being disparate from the town salaries, and we've heard from town employees about that. So from the beginning, that there was an intent, but then not a full commitment to going ahead and doing that. After that, we sort of coexisted with an advisory board and a light board and a board of selectmen who shared responsibilities, but the selectmen by and large deferred to the light board. That began to come apart later when there were conflicts between the Board of Selectmen and the light board. And finally, under one group of selectmen, they abolished the light advisory board and created instead the group that we have now. I was most convinced about this issue when Chris presented at our last meeting the concerns that he had and the concerns that were shared by members of his staff. And I also had a separate meeting with Chris to discuss this in more detail. And it finally came home to me how important it would be to set up an independent light board. So I think it's taken a long time to come to this point, but I at least personally was quite persuaded by Chris's arguments.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Bob, you want to?
Sure, Steve. Really appreciate Chris's bringing this to us as a parting gift. I appreciated in the presentation the last time the views of the employees in particular, and I also came to appreciate the difficulty in dealing with two boards. I could understand the efficiency, but the way it was presented by Chris, there's a normal way of dealing with a board, and having two boards gets in the way of that. And I came to understand that. I think one of the concerns that I have is if this is brought to town meeting, as we're suggesting here, if I were a town meeting member, I'd be wondering why am I hearing about this now? I probably was not a town meeting member 10 years ago when the Paul Solomon's group presented something. And either I didn't hear that this was greatly broken, and I probably should have, or it's not broke, so why should we fix it? So that's sort of the concerns that I have in bringing this forward.
Yeah, I think sure, that's understandable. I think a lot of people are going to say, well, if everything is more or less okay now, why are we monkeying with it? We've got a lot of bigger concerns in the town going on with budget things and overrides and so forth. So I think that is a valid concern, and somehow we just, I mean, that's why I think it's important to have everybody, all the ducks in a row, all the selectmen behind it, and have sort of a united front. But I think if that doesn't happen, then it becomes so much more difficult. So I don't know, we could go, you know, the three main points that I had was we just needed a board that was knowledgeable in utility energy matters. And no disrespect, Roy, I think you are, and Adam and Tom are pretty knowledgeable, but that isn't nearly always the case. And I think the other main point was that, well, I have two main points. One was that there just isn't enough time for the select board, light board members, select board, whatever you want to call it. There just isn't enough time for them to delve into the issues that we have before us, that the light board has, the light department has before us. And then also there just needs to be a separate voice for the light department. And it just makes it difficult when the light board and the select board are the same entity. So I don't know, others want to talk about that? Michael, Travis, Dave, anyone?
Steve, if I
Yeah, Roy, go ahead.
let's see. In terms of the history of MLab versus LBAC, I can't claim the degree of involvement of Ralph and Bob, but it seems plain to me that the select board was just not up to the task of being an effective light board, and MLab and LBAC were created as a way to try to make the light board really carry out responsibilities it should have been carrying out on its own. And in terms of overall responsibility, there is a pretty much complete independence between what the light board is concerned with and what the select board deals with. There's not a kind of synergy that exists with other questions that the select board deals with. So it seems to me that separating the two makes sense, because the select board as a select board actually does not bring a lot additional to the table that compared to what a regular dedicated independent light board would have. A lot of this is somewhat, I don't know, in the weeds. I think we were all impressed by what Chris was explaining the other day and what we heard from other members of the light department. But in terms of having a successful presentation at town meeting, I think September, which is likely to be the next town meeting, is just too soon. There's very little time anyway. There's going to be a complete preoccupation with the ordinary business of town meeting that ordinarily would have been done in the spring. And there's going to be a huge amount of discussion about an override and such things, so that there won't be any opportunity for the average town meeting member to know really why we're doing this, as Bob points out. But I think putting together an effective education effort and building a consensus for this should be very doable for April. So I would suggest that as a time frame. Also, because even when there is broad agreement on the desirability of an independent light board, there's still a lot of discussion necessary for the form of that light board, whether it's appointed or elected, how many people. And I don't see having those concepts adequately fleshed out in time for the closing of the warrant, which would be probably around Labor Day. So I would suggest making April the goal, but to try to really accomplish all of this at that time.
Okay, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves in terms of the timing. I understand what you're saying. So there's the idea is there'd be a September town meeting, a special town meeting, Roy, to look at primarily the override. They'd have to vote on override.
So the September town meeting would be to take up the matters that were not taken up in the spring because we didn't have a May town meeting. And that would include, at a minimum, consideration on the McLean, the actions by town meeting necessary for development at McLean to go forward. I think that's going to be extremely time consuming, and inevitably, I think there's going to be a focus on the budget, and the light board is hardly going to get any air to breathe in that kind of environment.
Okay. And then there wouldn't be another meeting there wouldn't be a December meeting, or let me back up. So the September meeting, would that be, is it anticipated that would be virtual as well, like the last one we had?
Nothing final has been decided, but I think we have to expect that.
Okay.
Nobody knows now.
And then there wouldn't be another town meeting until April. With presumably, maybe we could do that in person.
Hopefully, yeah. I mean, I think the original talk was a town meeting in November, but I think the goal is to try to consolidate and get everything done in September, just to avoid having to get together again in just a couple of weeks. But everything's a little bit in flux.
Okay. Well, I don't want to, you know, I think there is some momentum. We don't want to halt that. On the other hand, I understand what you're saying, but let's, I mean, we've got a ways to go before we even get to that. We need to get to the light board next week and get the other two members' temperatures and see where this might be headed. But just in terms of just getting back again to the recommending to the light board for a governance change, I think it'd be good to hear from everybody.
Michael, I saw you come on. Do you have a? No. Okay. Then I'll go. I think in some ways, Roy, I hear what you're saying, but I'm not sure how much space or air to breathe, as you said, you know, that this issue needs in a town meeting. Like, I don't feel it will be as controversial as some. And I feel especially if the select board and the members of this committee come out and speak, that are town meeting members, I guess, but would speak on its behalf, I think it would be not as hard of a sell as some other issues that we've discussed, like the Minuteman or something like that. So I feel like this is not an issue that will be super controversial, and I think it could be pretty clearly explained, and I think it could be done in a September meeting in a timely fashion. And again, I think the town's got a lot on its plate. I totally hear that. And yet this is one of those things that's on the plate. So I'm not sure just saying because we've got a lot means we can't do it. So I don't know. I have the argument of that we've got a lot to cover. Doesn't I think April's going to be busy and a mess also, just like given how things are going. So I don't think postponing it to April in the hope that we can do it in person or something it makes a lot of sense. And I think another thing I just say is I also have this sense that part of the issue that actually comes up is, you know, you mentioned that there wouldn't be a lot of time between now and Labor Day to finalize the warrant of the recommendation. I think that actually at some point is part of what the problem is that, you know, the select board is super busy and therefore can't come to some sort of, you know, have time to discuss this issue of governance. And I think in some ways that actually speaks to the fact that this is important to do. And so I understand that, you know, we have 2 months between now and Labor Day, but I think it's that part where the select board has so many meetings that meeting additionally as the light board to discuss things is hard to do. I think that's of course in the document that the government's reform goals document. But I think that that's something where I would be inclined to try to get this on the September meeting warrant.
I guess, Steve, sorry, Travis, I think what's on my mind is I don't know that the light board itself would settle on the specifics of a recommendation, because elected versus appointed is a pretty big deal. And at this point, the July meeting, you know, maybe this could be discussed, but then there'd be one more opportunity in an August meeting to try to finalize all of this. And I'm not sure that basically a meeting or a meeting and a half is enough to do this, because that's what we've got for a September town meeting.
Yeah, I
Okay.
guess I'm saying that this might be one of those times where a sprint at the end, so to say, for the light board, select board as light board could help get it off your plate for the rest of the year. You know, like maybe a couple, maybe more than just, you know, schedule a couple extra meetings and get this on the warrant.
Okay, I don't want, yeah, Michael, I don't want to, I just to say, I don't want to get too far into the weeds in the timing. The first issue is getting a recommendation to the light board, voting on a recommendation for having an independent governing board. But go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I'll be brief. So first, Steve, I support your question there. I think this is appropriate to get the recommendation to them, and I would, I think, echo the sentiment of at least some of the other LBAC members that, you know, strike while the iron is hot. This issue is front of mind for at least all of us, and I agree with what Travis has said in terms of everything's going to be busy now and everything's going to be busy next month, and probably everything is going to be busy for the foreseeable future. Postponing this, you know, I hear you, Roy. I understand why you're saying those things, and I don't disagree with them, but I think I agree more with the presentation of thoughts that Travis put out. And you know, on the elected versus appointed, we could even do something like, for the sake of momentum and getting this done, appoint a interim group of individuals who's got a very limited term until something else becomes finalized, or if it's going to be elected, put in a temporary appointed body or something to that effect to help kind of keep things moving and just get the job done. So I'll stop there. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, thanks. Well, I guess if everyone is on board with the need for an independent governing board body, we can at least send that recommendation, start right now with that, and send that recommendation to the light board. Is that the case, that everybody believes that and would raise their hand to say, yes, let's move to an independent governing board? Is that yes, Michael? All right, so Roy, I don't know either if you want to report that back to the light board next Monday, or if you'd like one of us to do that, we'd be happy to do it.
Yeah, I guess actually, Steve, maybe it should just be a formal motion that's voted so that it's in the minutes in that form.
Okay. Let's see. Then I guess I would move to recommend to the light board that there'd be a governance change, and that governance change would entail a move to an independent governing body for Belmont Light. All in favor? Is that okay in terms of the motion?
Is it worth, possible amendment, is it worth referring to the governance reform goals document? Like, you know,
I don't think it is.
Okay.
That's a long time ago, and
no, this is the one, the more recent draft, what Steve wrote.
the one that Steve wrote, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. And we can say, with reference to the Belmont Light governance reform goals, as to the reasons behind our behind the motion. You know, close enough, right? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so we have a unanimous vote of the of LBAC. That's great. And then we can go on to talk about the elected versus appointed board. And as you know, most of the towns and most of the municipalities in Mass have an elected board, either 3 or 5 members. There are a number that, there are less than 10 that have appointed boards, although that includes Concord and Wellesley, some of the ones closest to us. And I think Chris Shrewsbury has an appointed board. Where are you going?
Yes, Steve, that's correct.
So it is all over the place. And clearly the easiest legally to do would be the elected board, because the statutes and Chapter 164, the general laws provides that it can be done with a vote. An appointed board is a little bit more complicated, although Chris has KP Law has a proposal that would, I guess, streamline that somewhat. So I'll just start off by saying that either one, I think, is an advantage. It is advantageous compared to what we have now. I guess I have some feeling that an appointed board has some advantages in terms of the breadth of knowledge, that we can ensure that there'd be a breadth of knowledge, different people, different talents brought to that board. For instance, I think that the accounting element has been very important, that Bob has served Belmont Light really well. And the select board in appointing and making an appointed board could take into account the different needs for that independent board. So, I just don't necessarily see that happening with an elected board, but of course it could. So with that, I'll just throw it open to others. Michael?
Yeah, I guess maybe just to start, in terms of, you mentioned several numbers for the potential capacity of this new organization. Is there any formal requirement as to a minimum of individuals is X and a maximum is Y? Understanding then there's a sort of optimization of the preference would be 4 or 7 or 9 or something like that. But is there a statute that requires a minimum or maximum number, just so that we can put some fence posts around how many people are on such a board?
The statute provides, if it's an elected board, it has to be 3 or 5. They talk about, it goes into the details about staggered terms. So an elected board has to be 3 or 5. I don't believe that an appointed board is limited, because you can, it's a special provision or special act or whatever that's setting it up. So I think that it could be different. And I think some of the towns with appointed boards have different numbers of appointees.
Thank you.
Steve, could you just walk through the process for each of these, and maybe comment on how long you think it would take and any hang up places that might happen? I think I understand, but it'd be good just to all be on the same page.
Well, and the elected board is easy, Dave. I think all it requires is a vote of town meeting to propel, to set up an election at a particular point in the future. The appointed board, I know Chris has done some work with KP Law on that. I had always assumed that an appointed board needed a home rule petition, which means the legislature just has to act on it, which, normally does delay things, but is done frequently in many cases. But Chris, I know KP Law has that memo out on another way to go about it. I don't think I could explain it exactly, if Chris wants to, if Chris can.
Sure.
Go ahead, Chris.
All right. So my understanding, in, you know, obviously having some supplementary conversations with KP outside of the memo, is that the existing law, Steve, as you pointed out, it's the same. So elected and appointed seem to be the same, and I didn't bring it up on my screen. I might be misquoting, but I think Chapter 41. Basically what they're saying is there's an element of mass law that allows a municipality to put to ballot making a normally a statutory body that's elected, make them appointed. And so that would not only apply to light boards, but, you know, a number of other elected bodies in a town. And so for it's, you know, it's clear for elected, and then for appointed, basically that it, referring back to that memo, if the, you know, appointed is the desired path, it really, if you look closely, it's creating an elected body, and then at the next town election, you put it to ballot to turn that elected body into an appointed body. And so really the nuance of the warrant article really is saying our intent is to make this 3 or 5 member body appointed, but that's subject to ratification at election. And so, and that's leveraging the ability, I believe it was Chapter 41 of a town to make a normally elected body appointed, subject to a ballot.
So it is more complicated, Dave. And we obviously, KP Law has done a lot of good work on it. We'd have to have town council take a look at it and see, and then sort of, if appointed was the way we wanted to go, we'd have to make a determination as to exactly what the process was, either home rule or the elected and then the appointed procedure that Chris has just pointed out.
It just, okay, Chris, clarification. It sounded to me like for the appointed, you have to go through the elected step process first, and then you act off of that, right? So no matter what you do, you have to go through the elected process. Is that correct?
That would be correct. You'd have an elected body until the point of which the town approves an appointed
Okay.
modification.
And then the town at any point can then decide to go to, it doesn't have to be right away. It can be later if they want to.
Absolutely. It could be at any point
Okay.
in the future.
Okay.
Hang on, I'm a little confused on that. So we would set this up initially. There would be a townwide vote where there would be actual ballots to everybody in Belmont to vote, and that would appoint an initial group of individuals, and then from there, if there was desired, that would be modified so there'd never be another ballot again. It would just be appointed. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes. So let me make sure I understand how you laid that out as well. It would be, the warrant article would indicate the intent to go appointed, but you know, using that process, it would be an elected body first. So that, as you mentioned, that would be some form of ballot measure. And then after that, whether it be immediate or in the future, a subsequent ballot would then change that from elected to appointed.
Yeah, Michael, just to be clear, the alternative to that is town meeting voting for an appointed body and then sending off a request for a home rule petition to the legislature to allow that. So there's
Gotcha.
two ways that an appointed body could be established, the one that Chris is recommending, and then the home rule petition. I'm pretty sure that was the alternative.
Steve, I think the home rule petition would be a wiser approach. If you have a body elected and then try to go back and have it appointed by the select board, I can imagine all sorts of controversy in town meeting over that. And to also get the select board on board this whole idea, I think it would be at least worthwhile having it done directly through a special law so that they can have a voice right up front rather than have to fight another battle later on.
Yeah, no, I mean, I tend to agree with that, but I tend to agree with that. I think if you want to do it, you should just do it at the outset rather than having a two-step process. But, you know, I mean, I guess there's different ways to look at that too.
So along those lines, Steve, and I understand people don't know, but let's say you take the home rule petition route for the appointed versus elected. What's the timelines here? You know, because there is a sense of urgency that I don't think we all want to lose. So are we talking about years? Are we talking about months? Get a board? I mean, and what's the difference, right? Is one going to be quicker than the other? You think? Because I don't think any of us want to be in 5 years, but what happened? We just spent 5 years.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't, you know, I should talk to Dave Rogers and Will Brownsberger and see, and take their temperature on that.
Okay.
You know, home rule petitions are passed all the time by the legislature. Of course, the legislature is meeting, I think, remotely these days or something like that. So complications. So
Maybe
yeah,
it's
I mean,
say
I'm
it's
sorry,
months
Ralph.
rather than years.
Would you say months rather than years? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Either one's months rather than years. Okay.
Yeah, no, years would be that would be a disqualification, I think.
So Steve, what you, I'll hold my comments about elected versus appointed for the moment, but there's also the question then of the role of LBAC in this new regime. And I have to say, based on the discussion since Chris first brought this up, it seems to me that that LBAC should actually follow what its name says. It's a light board advisory committee. It seems to me that its primary role should be advisory to the light board and actually not have the kind of relationship with the light department that it's had for the last, actually since it's been in existence. And let the light board be the primary point of contact in terms of oversight of the light department, and that LBAC or a body like LBAC, I think actually could usefully remain in existence, but should work with the light board.
Well, yeah, Chris?
I just, it's almost as if Roy is reading my computer. I just you know, hoping it might be helpful in case that very comment came up. And we did solicit some clarifications from KP Law about how that relationship could work moving forward. And so it's not included in any of these, you know, meeting materials, but just wanted to piggyback on Roy's comment to say that that guidance is available as of yesterday. And it basically says exactly what he just stated. So, but I just wanted to point that out to so you know it's available as a resource potentially as for future discussion.
I guess I was under the impression we were voting ourselves out of existence.
So was I.
Well, Steve, I would suggest not only primarily because regardless of who's serving on the light board, I think there will always be a value for people with particular expertise to help the light board. And whether, if an accountant's on the light board, fine, but you can't count on that. But I think having something like LBAC with accounting expertise, as well as potentially engineering expertise or any other relevant skill, would be a desirable a desirable capability.
Okay, I mean, I guess that can be decided as we go and as depending how things work out. I am cognizant of not burdening the light department with too many bodies. I mean, that's one of the things we were trying to avoid here. So, but I think, to the extent that more expertise is needed and more advice is needed and it works out, then I guess the select board and the light board, the independent light board, can make that decision.
I also was under the impression that that we were voting ourselves out of a job, or that last vote indicated that maybe we wanted to give up our spots. And I feel that I don't see how the two bodies could exist and still make for sort of a single voice. And I think part of what my vision of this would be is that the expertise and time that LBAC can spend on the problem is something that the light board would do to make as they vote with real power, they would hopefully be informed. So that's what I thought the direction was.
Okay, yeah, but let's not get, I guess that, could remain to be seen, but I do want to, one of my points in the reform goal memo is eliminate duplication of functions. So I just want to make sure that we're staying consistent with that. But I do want to just get back to the appointed versus elected board. And I guess one other point, the appointed board, we can write whatever we want in the home rule petition in terms of having people with particular expertise on the board, so it is a diverse range of abilities and expertise. But anyway, I think if people could just address that point, elected versus appointed.
Yeah, Steve, I'll pick it up here. I was initially appointed actually by the town moderator, Henry Hall, who had learned that we had come back from San Francisco and said, I'd like you to get involved in the town. We need an accountant. And I said, well, it sounds like the audit committee. And he said, no, we've just filled that spot. Of course, now I'm on the audit committee. But Henry said, how about, this particular job in evaluating retail choice. So I was sort of the initial appointee. We also had a lawyer that went on. As far as this issue is concerned, putting the process aside, and we discussed the process, I could be persuaded either way. When I first thought about this over time, I favored the elected route, and that was as a bow to prevailing practice, and also listening to the selectmen at the time to be as accountable as possible to the ratepayer citizens. I was concerned, though, about in an election having a single issue candidate step up, and as our business deteriorated into a single issue over time, that became more and more of a concern to me. I used to spend time in the spring, probably 3 or 4 years, joining Tim Richardson and then Jim Palmer at meetings of MEME. And I had the opportunity there to talk, for instance, to Ipswich, where they have an advisory board, as we talked about it, and seemed to work pretty well from the standpoint of the both the general manager and a member of the advisory board who happened to be attending. I also talked to a number of members of elected boards, and the election process wasn't a big deal, and the single issue candidate hadn't come up with as an issue anywhere. I remember the discussions with Paul Solomon and Anne Marie Mahoney and their group And at the time, they were addressing this. I think there was a sentiment in town that there were too many elected boards already. And that is obviously something that would come up if there were still that sentiment in town meeting, and that might threaten to derail the whole issue. I don't know if that's the sentiment today. But again, I could be persuaded either way at this point.
The number of elected boards, I think, was strictly a town issue, and it had to do with whether or not the town administrator had enough authority versus these independent boards. I think one could segregate that and consider the light department as a separate entity, and I don't think that same feeling of concern about elected boards would apply. I think we're talking about here something quite different.
I will say, when I looked at the municipal light departments, called the town clerks and looked at the websites, this is a couple of years ago now, a lot of towns had more elected bodies than we did, planning boards and health boards and I don't know, other entities. So it didn't seem like we had that many, but I know that's been something that's been mentioned, not wanting too many elected boards. Okay, others?
You know, there are clearly pros and cons for each form, and no form seems to have a decisive advantage over the other. There are some sort of pragmatic concerns. And on the elected side, especially in a town as small as Belmont, there's a similar issue as when we were talking about the number of selectmen, which is, you know, can you be sure of finding sufficient number of candidates? And I think that concern will always be there, but I think it argues for having an elected board of 3 rather than 5. On the other hand, I think when you look at the way committees are actually appointed and how they function, I think ultimately there is a significant risk of lack of direct accountability, because committees end up getting run by a given individual for actually a long time. And truthfully, the degree of oversight by the select board can be lacking. And I think having an elected body just requires, it gives, I think it's more effective oversight. And if somebody is truly committed to the activity, then I think running for office is an appropriate ask of that person, because otherwise, and let me just give one example. I hope it doesn't ruffle too many feathers. You know, when Ashley Brown was appointed to MLab, it seems to me that he was appointed in the hope that he was a utility expert and could relieve the select board of a responsibility that they didn't feel up to. But in the end, it was an unfortunate choice, and he stayed on for way longer than he should have. And that's the type of practical governance issue that I think is best avoided by making it an elected position.
Okay. Dave, Travis, Michael?
I'll weigh in quickly. I think I agree with Roy, and I think there's 2 main reasons. I think the elected would be nominally more independent, and I think, and 2, it just seems like, you know, this has been kicked down the road for 15 years. It just seems like, what's the easiest, quickest solution here to get something done? It seems like if the elected is not the way to go in 2 to 3 years, it seems like it can be transitioned to appointed. I'm not sure it can go the other way that easily. So it seems like, to me, the pros of the elected outweigh the appointed. Although if appointed is the way, if it's appointed or nothing, I'll definitely go appointed.
I'm sorry, what'd you say, Dave?
I said if it's going to be appointed board or no board, it stays status quo, I'd go with the appointed board. So I
Okay,
would go with that, but I prefer the elected.
okay. Travis?
I guess I agree. My inclination is also on the elected, and I agree with Roy's assessment and Dave's second around accountability. I maybe slightly disagree with Dave's. Do it because it's the most expeditious type of approach, but I think that's a bonus in that sense. I think it's probably more the accountability and the way to speak to it. One slight difference in perspective is I see that we have a board of 7 as LBAC. I would appreciate a larger elected board. I hear your concern, Roy, and maybe I hadn't thought about that, but I feel like 5. I think a 5-size board would be better for the board, and maybe this is also a difference. Not to allude too much of like how you see an advisory board working. So maybe there's something, but I just feel a larger elected board would be a way to go forward, so that there's more expertise on the panel itself, and that. But that would be that's where my gut was initially speaking to things. So,
Michael?
Thanks, Steve. I guess I'd like to ask a question of Craig and of Chris, is to say, my thought here is you have LBAC, which has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people on it. Does that feel overwhelming, that there's too many voices in the room, that there's too much perspective? Does that feel appropriately deep because you have so many voices, you have so many perspectives, you got so much background? And if we're looking at an elected board and it's potentially, well, you only have 3 people, what feels better for light board in terms of how many people are on this new governance body?
Craig, if you don't mind, if I can take a stab at that first.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, just speaking from my seat, if you will, I would say that coordinating communications with the governing body is probably easier with the 5-member board. Setting agendas, having a quorum, things like that. I think having the additional members makes it a little bit easier. Or if it's certainly a helpful interface with the chair, but even being able to have a second person in the room, if we were to vet an issue, is helpful. And that doesn't break any open meeting laws or anything like that. So I think, that's not a strong opinion, but I think if you pressed me on it, I'd probably say the 5-member would edge out a little bit. But I think, and that's mostly from a communication standpoint and in making sure there's a quorum present and being flexible.
And can I clarify real quick, 5 is a preference as opposed to say 3, which is different than 5 is the preference as opposed to say an appointed board, which I understand from earlier discussion could be 9 or could be 7.
So correct. And I guess to that point also, in order to be more than 5, you'd be forced that home rule petition path. The one I presented there would be 3, because it goes elected first, that means it has to be 3 or 5. And so if you wanted to start out of the gate with more than that, that's the petition process. And I would say, I haven't, in working with, say, with the LBAC process, having 7 people I haven't really seen, as one body. I don't think it hasn't been a challenge. So I'd say perhaps there's more of a difference between 3 and 5 versus 5 and 7. Again, with the flexibility, the quorum, so I guess from that perspective, I wouldn't have any red flags to raise from my seat. And 5 is just kind of in that middle ground that kind of is happy medium.
I mean, from the sound of it, I think everybody is okay with 3 or 5. And 7 to me seems like too much.
Sure.
Sure.
Again, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but I just wanted to.
Well, I guess for me, I can't answer the question of, by its very nature, the elected version is capped at 3 or 5. And so your comment there, Steve, is helpful to me to understand that your preference is you want fewer people, which is intricately tied to, do you want an elected board or do you want an appointed board? Because if there was broad consensus that we said, hey, we need to have the same number of people as there is on LBAC in this new functioning body, then we can't do an elected version. And so that's really the nature of the question, is to say.
I mean, it seems to me that 5 is the right number, but 3 could be the right number too. Ralph, did you want to just talk about elected versus appointed?
I did. I think to some extent this is going to be an issue that needs to be decided jointly by the select board and our body. If we're going to bring something like this to town meeting, it's going to be important that the select board signs off on it and that we sign off on it together. And Roy, I'm just guessing here, but my guess would be that the select board is going to prefer appointed because it still gives them the appointing power over this body. Is that an accurate guess?
We haven't really discussed it, and I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me if the select board would fail to reach agreement in the first meeting.
Okay. I just raised that. I mean, at some point, we're going to have to, I think if we're going to get anything through town meeting, we'll have to all have support for the same thing. If we don't, then town meeting can very easily decide it shouldn't do anything.
Right.
Steve,
And
can
do you
I
have a preference for appointed versus elected, Ralph?
I had originally thought it would be preference for appointed, largely because we could define the sorts of people and skills that we wanted to see on that board. But I'm more concerned, after having listened to Roy and members of the Light Department last meeting, I'm more concerned that we do something to establish a separate board. And I'm less concerned about whether it's appointed or elected.
Okay, so in terms of what we can report back to the Light Board.
Steve, hang on just a second.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I just, in the question that I'd asked, I just wanted to give Craig the opportunity to, if he had anything to comment on that. We didn't give him the opportunity to respond.
Thank you. I guess I would somewhat echo what Chris has said. I do think that 5 is an appropriate number for a board. It does give a lot more flexibility to discuss issues without, within the confines of the open meeting law. More than 5, it hasn't really been a problem. I think I can see where it could become a problem, but I'm not overly concerned with that. So I think, a board of 7 would work, could work. It's similar to what we have now. I think probably people that don't want a board that high might be concerned with having enough interest in filling a board of that size. From what I've seen in my time in Belmont, there is no shortage of candidates that would like to be part of the Light Department, and whether it be a board or a committee. So I think that certainly the past isn't indicative of the future, but it's been, hasn't been a problem for us, and I don't foresee that being a problem. So if I had to put a vote in, I'd say a board of 5 would be the correct board.
Thanks, Greg. Steve, just to answer your question, then I think my preference is I would be happy with either function, but the elected version with a 5-member board seat, I think seems appropriate both for getting the right number of people on the board as well as being responsive to the light board general manager's preferences. So that's my recommendation here.
Travis?
Thank you. So I'm wondering, since election seems to be, well, I guess if it's a home rule petition, then maybe an election, but I'm sensing that just coming back to a little bit to the timing about September or April, or the kind of when it's put forth at town meeting, it seems like we should at least be aware of when potential ballots are. And like, I don't know if this would be on a November ballot. Like, I don't know if those ballots typically are town stuff is in April. But you know, if it were in spring meeting of May or whatever of next year, that'd be kind of after a natural election cycle. So it might be another reason to kind of try to have it in September or something like that.
Okay, well, let me just back up for a second before we get to the timing and say, in terms of us reporting back to the light board on Monday, my sense is that the general feeling is that an elected board is our general preference, that if we were pushed to say we need to do something and it would be an appointed, and the light board wants to do an appointed board, that there isn't a strong opposition to that, but that generally speaking, the feeling seems to be an elected board would be better. I don't want to, I just don't want to get too far out in advance ahead of the light board. I mean, we have all heard, I think, Adam Dash's feelings about how this should be structured, and it is not what we've been talking about today. So I'm hoping that can be moved. We can move beyond that and get to an agreement. But just as a general matter, everybody agrees, right, that from what we've heard just now, that elected board, probably 5-member elected board, but could be a 3-member elected board, is the general feeling the way things should go, and that an appointed board is also a possibility if the elected board doesn't seem to be a viable option. Is that correct?
I think it's correct from my point of view, and it's what I heard also, Steve.
Okay.
I would wonder if we could make it stronger, just as far as like, LBAC recommends at the moment. It doesn't have to be a binding vote. And Ralph, I totally agree with what you said, like, and that, unified voice need to come to this together. But I wonder if we could more strongly put something on the table for the light board to react to. And maybe it's not necessary because it's pretty obvious that what's on the table, but
I think having a motion is the best way to crystallize the sense of the board.
Okay, someone want to make a motion?
should
Can I
I?
ask just a quick clarifying question before, Stephen, in the description that you gave out, you said 3 or 5. Does it make sense to be specific here? Do we want to make a recommendation for 3 or 5, or do we want the light board to make that decision?
Yeah.
Because I think that if we don't, they're going to.
What I'm proposing, just with the idea of putting something that for the light board to react to, is a pretty specific recommendation of 3 or 5, and I kind of heard 5. In fact, I was
5.
looking at the Word document, the elected light board Word document that has 5 written in it, the KP law document. And so if we wanted to use, I don't know if we need to refer to specific language, but that would be, the motion could be to put that forward as the recommended proposal.
Okay. Should we try it out with a motion? Someone want to make one?
Any discussion around that specific document?
Well,
Or, I mean, like, just like, does that, just making sure everyone has it in front of them and knows what it says. I guess that's maybe.
the which document is that, Travis?
So it's, I believe Aiden circulated it, Word document, elected light board town meeting. Wait, I can't read the rest of the title from the document. Town meeting warrant article.
The warrant that KP Law put together, is that what we're talking about?
Correct.
No.
And the bold text within the document says town meeting vote 5-member independent elected light board.
Steve, could I mention that we do have a number of single issue elected boards in town? I just checked. So we have elected water commissioners, we have elected assessors, and we have elected cemetery commissioners. Ralph, I don't know if there are any more, but there are each one of those boards has 3 elected members, and I suspect for the reasons that I felt before that it was likely to be a challenge to find 5 people regularly, and ideally, you know, positions should be contested, and to have enough candidates to contest 5 seats is a big ask for a town of this size.
Yeah. Maybe, Travis, we should just leave it open as to the 3 or 5 at this point. We need to get buy-in for an elected to start off with, and that can be determined later.
I hear you. And one of the things that I would say is just this, like by proposing a number 5, I would say that better signals communicates the discussion that we've just had.
Yeah, I just don't know if there's consensus about 5. I don't know. I'm unsure myself.
I support 5. I mean, I think the fact that LBAC has more than 5 members today, and there are at least 1, if not 2 people that have been at every light board meeting I have attended when the issue of appointing new members to LBAC has come up. There seems to be plenty of people waiting in the wing that are interested and would like to be involved in this. So I feel like the combination of, I hear you, Roy, you want this to be competitive, you want this to be, you know, and is there enough people to do it? But at the same time, I see in the town, there does appear to be this many people that are interested. And the depth that you're going to get with 5 versus 3 to me just seems useful. So I have a stronger preference for 5 than 3.
I agree with Michael.
Well, I understand that, Michael and Bob, but I do think running for office is a little bit different than, you know, putting your name in to be appointed to a board. There's a lot of people involved with town government too, but sometimes it's hard to find a person that wants to run for the select board, and there's only 3 people on it. So I can, you know, I mean, I don't know how many of us would be willing to really run for an elected board. I'm not sure. It's a whole nother deal.
Steve, I think one of the issues here is what does that running for a board entail? Belmont is fairly unique in terms of having a very contested seat for select boards when there are contests, and a lot of money is spent. You go to some other towns like Concord, there is virtually no money spent on getting onto the board. In fact, that's true in many of the towns we looked at when we looked at 3 versus 5 members of the select board. Belmont is one of the few towns, there are 3 or 4 where running for that board is very competitive, takes a lot of time. It's a big electoral contest. I'm not sure it would be for the light board. It certainly isn't right now for housing board. It isn't for any of the other elected boards. I think it's a fairly minor sort of thing for campaign. So you should be able to find people who are willing to at least put their name in.
Just a clarification, say it is a 5-member board and only 3 people run. Do the other 2 seats get appointed? How would that work? I mean, it would say not enough people run. Do you just have a 3-person board or?
Well, fortunately, 3 is a quorum at that point. I don't know, but I suspect the other 2 seats would be vacant.
Okay, so I thought like with the school
Yeah.
committee recently, somebody stepped down and somebody was appointed in the interim or something.
But there's a procedure for that that's been well established because there
Okay.
have been people departing from the school committee fairly regularly. I think you could establish a procedure for this too.
Yeah, just in case, you know, if it were 5 and only 3 or 4 people ran or something, if it was the 5th get appointed, it might be a backstop.
Yeah, Dave, I don't know, because the procedure for the school committee contemplated a resignation of somebody midterm, and then there would be an appointment until the next election. I don't think it contemplated lack of a candidate for the election itself.
You're right. You're right. I stand corrected on that. It is for a resignation. That
Yeah.
procedure is established.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Where are we?
Well, we're getting into the weeds of how we would develop everything. I'm not sure we need to answer all of these questions.
Well, I again, maybe coming back to my proposal, since as I propose that Roy suggests we have a motion. I propose that the motion try to embody what I heard us mostly coming to agreement on, which I thought was elected in 5-person. So that's what I think we were discussing.
I would suggest breaking it maybe into 2 motions, just to make it clear, if there is truly a consensus that it should be elected, make that be the first motion, and then a second motion maybe regarding more specifics about the actual form of the.
Yeah.
We could just have a size, and then people could if it was a second motion, it could be maybe the motion could be 5, and then Steve, you could disagree, or you know, it could be show the disagreement.
Yeah, okay, so let's vote on whether there should be an elected board. And we're not going to specify the size. That's going to be a separate motion. So is everybody in favor of an elected board?
Well, I can make a motion if that's.
Well, I thought I was, but go
Sorry.
ahead. Go ahead.
I didn't hear it. So moved that the Light Board Advisory Committee recommends that the Light Board becomes an elected body in Belmont.
Okay.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. We seem to have consensus on that again. Yeah. And then the second motion would be Travis.
Moved that the size of the new Light Board should be 5 members.
Second.
Okay. Discussion. I'm gonna abstain on that one because I'm just not sure about 3 versus 5. Anyone else?
Do we need to repeat any of the comments we've made previously for the sake of?
No, I don't think so.
Are we voting on this motion now of 5?
Yes,
By show of hands, I'll go.
you're doing 5.
5.
That's 1, 2, 3. I think it's 5,
Five
501.
and 1 abstention. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Well, I think that is pretty good covering of a lot of the bases, and we need to now go to the Light Board and have a discussion there and see what we can push forward. Whether it makes sense to push it forward for September or whether there's going to be agreement on anything we've just voted on. So I think we need to see where that goes next Monday. And maybe we can set up a meeting in the not too distant future to take up what we've heard from the light board and see where we can push it further.
Steve, one quick recommendation is that as along with the votes that we just made, is that we pass along the goals document that you drafted. I think
Yes.
that would be useful for the light board.
Okay. Yeah. Absolutely. And Roy, let us know what you think the best way to communicate this is to the light board, either by email or something like that, or to speak up at the meeting, or both.
Steve, I think it would be helpful, because the minutes won't be ready that soon, maybe, if you could send an email so governance will be an agenda item for Monday. And if you sent an email to me and Aiden and Craig and Chris, that email could be part of the materials distributed for that meeting.
Okay. I'll do that, and probably need, let's see, that. When does the agenda have to go in? That has to go in.
I was actually waiting to put the agenda together until we had this meeting today to see where it's all.
Okay, so I need to get you something probably by the end of the day today.
That would work.
Okay, I'll do that. All right, great. I think hopefully we're making some progress after 15 years, we'll see. Chris, moving on to the next agenda item. ENE versus MWEC, or I don't know, maybe Craig as well. I'm not sure who all is going to discuss this.
I'm happy to take that, and certainly then you, Craig, can fill in the gaps. So one of the things that I wanted to highlight, I guess, before the transition to Craig is one of our internal initiatives to look at our options for managing power supply, but really continuing to be able to, meet the aggressive climate objectives that we have in our staying at the, at the forefront with energy developments. And so right now, maybe just as a very quick background, and I'm sure folks are familiar, but right now we're members of Energy New England. And Energy New England essentially is our consultant, if you will, our broker, or our agent, whatever terminology I think fits best is. And so they perform a number of services on our behalf. One representing, we engage in their regulatory services, so they represent us for ISO matters and the regulatory markets. They also transact on our behalf for the market transactions, and they also go out and find projects for us to fulfill our hedging strategy. And then we also use them for DSM. And so there's kind of an a la carte, I guess, model that they offer. And then second to that, as a subsequent, they are a relatively new organization, in comparison. So I believe they were formed in the late 90s. Whereas the original Joint Action Agency, and so they're more of an energy cooperative. They're formed under a separate set of statutes than the original formal Joint Action Agency, which is the Mass Municipal Wholesale Electric Company. And they were formed, I believe that was the late 60s, as a true Joint Action Agency that at one point had all the mass munis. And so the services I described were the intent of their formation. They took all the 41 mass munis and, you know, essentially performed bulk procurements on their behalf to realize the economies of scale. And so back in the 60s, when they were formed, different than E&E, they went through a legislative process. So they're actually a political subdivision of Massachusetts. And so with that comes additional services that they offer that E&E cannot, given their separate constructs within law. And so what that means is, yes, they offer the same type of power supply management services. They have regulatory services and they have DSM, but the additional piece that they've had, and obviously this is evolving with history, but they offer, because of their status, they offer financing options that E&E cannot. And so a big advantage they have, so, you know, as folks may know, you know, we participate through E&E as, you know, in PPA arrangements, but we're just an off-taker, we're not an owner. Whereas because of the way MWEC was established, the options they have available are greater, where you could be an owner in generating facilities as a pooled ownership program. But really they offer a financing arm to, you know, to build store, you know, and so that's evolved, right? Obviously it started with some gas facilities, then they had the nuclear plant, and now that's, you know, evolving into solar and storage. And so really what they offer as an MWEC member, what you can realize there is their borrowing ability. And so they offer the opportunity, should you choose to utilize that, to finance projects in member towns. So where I thought this would be an advantage for Belmont is this is separate. So, you know, our typical model is for major capital projects is to go to town meeting for borrowing authorization. And that works. However, you know, given the significant capital projects facing Belmont, really, you know, between the high school, police station, you know, the needs for DPW, a library, I mean, the list goes on, everyone knows what it is. You know, I do have some concerns about our ability to continue to go and seek further financing for our projects for solar and storage and perhaps operational center improvements and such. And so this is an additional, they offer this additional option. You don't have to take it, but it's additional option to go and use their financing ability to make investments in our projects. In addition, you know, in a similar vein, they also offer refinancing options for existing debt, such as the substation, that could then be transferred off of the town's, you know, borrowing liabilities and then put on the MWEC side. And so really it's and the other piece of this is with the true MWEC being the true joint action agency model, you become a member and you have the ability to run for the officer seats and become you know, and join the board of directors, assuming you get elected. Whereas for E&E, we're just a customer. We have no ownership stake. We have no decision-making ability, you know, and we don't really have any forum, truthfully, whatsoever to provide feedback aside from sending emails saying, hey, you know, what are you doing? Whereas MWEC with the joint action agency model, you have an ability to take a seat at the table and represent the direction of the industry. So one of the things we've been strongly considering is a transition from E&E to MWEC to leverage the borrowing abilities. There's other stuff that I'm leaving off, such as OPEB trust and other financial management mechanisms, because I think these you know, we've gone pretty far into the research process where the transition, obviously nothing is simple nowadays, but they offer a substantial amount of resources to make a transition like that happen. And so we've looked at making this switch. I guess, you know, other things that come to mind, they offer a simplified model where included in their services is also cost of service studies. I think, you know, the typical approach was biannual financial checkups, but they certainly will come out more frequently. And so there's this, you know, decades long, I guess, evolution of processes that are available. And so making the switch, it's just you know, again, looking at it like a consultant, like a contractor, they offer a wider range of services and a membership model that empowers Belmont a bit more than we get today. And so, you know, keeping those options open, especially giving, you know, our ability and our interest to further our initiatives and keep making progress on our goals. You know, we want to make sure we keep those options open and hedge ourselves against whatever the financial situation of the town may be as well, in the borrowing availability or even appetite. Because I think somewhat of the challenge is explaining to town meeting that we also want to borrow for storage and solar, which are requirements given the deed restrictions of the incinerator site. And you know, and that would be at these same town meetings where we're talking about, you know, budget overrides and, you know, the high school debt and all of that. And so I just think it gives the Belmont Light more options to leverage and discuss in the future. So we're looking at making that change perhaps over the summer. So I think I hit all my talking points and would happy to field any questions.
Okay, I mean, to me, if you and Craig and Becca and others are good with making that change, MWEC certainly is a long established entity, and to the extent they can help us more than E&E and a little more transparent than E&E, then I don't know if there's any other discussion, but I'll open it up.
Comment, Chris, thank you for the explanation. That certainly makes a lot of sense. Just a little history on this. When I first started here, we were using MWEC, and they expanded their generation, ran into some financial problems. The management was replaced. At that time, our investment advisor bought a bunch of MWEC bonds to put in our portfolio, probably at a discount. And I was very uncomfortable with that situation, and told the board, you know, that I had somehow wound up with these bonds. I told the guy to sell the bonds. Eventually, we wound up, the department wound up moving to E&E. I think the first month that we were with E&E, they came out and made a presentation to become co-owners of E&E. And I don't know if they still offer that, but that was something that they asked us to be owners of. I think at least we're at a distance as an advisory board, but I think we've been well served by our representatives of E&E. I don't know, Chris, have you and Craig met someone who would serve a similar function at MWEC, be your close advisors on power procurement? Yes,
and I would say, you know, given that Becca provides the bulk of the support in that regard. She's been very emphasis on very thorough on making sure if this is a project she has to support, that there's a team behind her. And so I think if I had to boil it down into the most simplified description, the power supply related support that E&E and MWEC offered in that category are roughly equivalent. And so if there wasn't this other financing element that offers opportunities, the argument would be harder to make such a switch. But there's other smaller components behind this that also help tip the scales in their direction. And so I guess the shortest answer to your question is yes, they have a similar power supply team. We've met with them several times since, maybe January, perhaps. I don't quite recall, but it's been a while. And so we're encouraged by what we've seen that they can offer us, and their presentations on data and the results that they've been able to achieve in their procurements and competitive pricing. And so we in our due diligence haven't really been able to find too many flaws that would give us pause.
Great, that's very helpful. I just wanted just to mention that
Sure.
with their having this financing capability, there is a potential for us as board members to have a conflict of interest, or to at least perceive one, whether it was actual or not. Whether I overreacted, I don't know, but it's something that's there that wouldn't be there with E&E.
That's a good point. Really good point.
I'll just jump in and say that, I've had, I go back with MWEC about 35 years and have been critical of them for many of those years. I just think that, they got into trouble initially when I was at the DPU with buying too much expensive nuclear. And there have been just other things over the years where I just didn't respect them as an organization. But I believe that's turned around now, and we should go with the people who we have the most confidence in terms of power supply, people bringing us good projects, as well as, I guess, the financing element as well. So I don't have an ability to judge between the power supply teams, but I defer to Chris and Craig and Becca and others who have been intimately involved in that.
I'm looking at the time, so do we need, I apologize if I missed this, but are there costs involved with switching? And I guess the other question kind of related is this an either or not? Is this just a decision of, like, when we pick up the phone, who do we call first? Which numbers on speed dial?
Yep. So there really are, as you point out, three options. This would be, if we do it right, invisible to anyone on the outside. This is purely, so the three options are handle it in-house, or go with one of these other two firms. There could be some creative option in between, but for argument's sake, those are the three. And so given a utility of our size, we obviously don't have the capabilities to do that in-house. And so those are the two options we have available. And so to Steve's point, and again, as you mentioned, the time, so just a 10-second, obviously this predates me, but E&E was formed because of dissatisfaction with MWEC back in the 90s. And I think that dovetails a little bit with what Steve had said had happened. And so, but again, geez, look how long ago the 90s were now. It's crazy. And so that's where we've really tried to do our due diligence with vetting the organization. And what's also nice is I think it's an advantage in that with their model, say, just for argument's sake, say E&E was headed down a path we didn't like. We're purely a customer. We have no ability to influence them or right the ship. Whereas MWEC, you can get on the board of directors, you can have a say, and they, similar to a light board, if you will, can set the policy direction. And so there is an ability to control our destiny, if you will, more so with MWEC than there is with E&E. So I think that's another inherent advantage.
Okay, so I don't think we need a vote. We don't need, we can discuss this at further meetings if need be. If there's anything else, maybe we should turn to the next topic. I know Travis, I know you've got to sign off, but
I was able to find someone to lead the meeting, so I'm good. Thank you.
okay. Good. All right.
Steve,
so,
can I
yeah,
ask a quick question?
Michael? Yeah.
Chris, that was very helpful background and perspective on it, and I don't disagree, and in fact, I think I agree with many of the points you've made. Maybe just as a topic for follow-up at a subsequent meeting, my impression from attending various kinds and types of functions that involve municipal light groups is that MWEC is viewed less favorably than E&E from a progressive, green power, renewable sort of advocacy position. And given that LBAC, the light board, we have taken positions, there was a lot of discussion about a year ago around should we be sending letters to various elected officials regarding light policies, et cetera. MWEC doesn't seem to be as consistent with that mission. I hear you on being elected to the board, but that also is a lot of work and time and attention to go in and sort of affect that change. So I don't know that we need to have that discussion now, but I would like to sort of have that be something that is included in maybe follow up or if there's brief thoughts you have now, but just I want to make that observation as part of the consideration for that change.
Yep, absolutely. Just to, again, be in the interest of being concise, I am fully aware of that reputation. We asked some very frank questions about that when we met with them. I think some of that is a result of, in some ways, I haven't done this officially, but if you look at the map of membership, even if you took it to just general voting results, their membership tends to be the western half of the state, whereas E&E's the eastern half. And so I feel like if you looked at election results in general, you'd see differing policy opinions. And so with that being said, one of the things we'd like to do with that is we probably would retain E&E's demand side management services. We're very happy with Kristen and her team. So leveraging this a la carte type of model, we'd be able to help influence how MWEC evolves while also leveraging some of these other teams that offer more progressive initiatives at the moment.
Thank you.
And then since you asked the question too, similar on the regulatory side, that's one of the a la carte options. We could stay with E&E and Dave Kavanaugh or use MWEC's team. And so just for thoroughness, those are options out there.
Okay, that's helpful.
Okay, great. With that, should we move to the remaining time we have left to talk about time of use rates? And Dave, were you going to tee something up on that? Or did you want to talk to that?
Given the time, Steve, maybe I'll just kind of make an announcement about what it is and respect people's time. But along with this meeting, we're posted two materials. One's a fairly significant spreadsheet that I worked on, and Becca and Ben at Belmont Light supplied a lot of the material for that. And the idea was, you know, TOU, it sounds like a great idea, but what are you really talking about? And I kind of view it as like when you buy a car, you often want to go test drive different cars. And so that's the intent of that spreadsheet is we can, you know, whatever models we might be interested in, what does it look like? And particularly for some of the goals we talked about, you know, is low income impacted negatively? What does that mean for people with heat pumps? Those kinds of questions. And that's the intent of the sheet. There's also a little slideshow that explains it, that goes with it. But anyways, the main point I just want to make is trying to keep the ball rolling. I know there's a lot of other things going on here, but just to facilitate conversations and try to get an idea, drill down to get some answers. And we all have tons of questions about what's the impacts and the benefits and negatives of all these. So that's intended as a start. We've got a lot of feedback already, great feedback. There's some ideas to add different types of rates in there and maybe shore up a few things here and there. But anyways, the idea is to get a discussion going and particularly look at impacts on different groups, strategic electrification and solar and such. So anyways, that's posted, and I hope we can keep the conversation going, and in future meetings maybe dig into some of the details, but I know we're digesting a lot of this heavy governance stuff. So that's it, Steve. I think.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Yeah, that looks like a lot of great work. And I think we probably need to schedule a meeting or meetings just to go through it in detail, because there's a lot of detail to look at. But at least we have the material now. I got to say the spreadsheet is kind of daunting.
Well, I think Becca and Ben, because they want to consider all these options, you know, PV and heat pump PV and EV, and I'm all for that, but it just kind of every time you add a new layer, it builds out. So, but they did the brunt of the work getting the data out, the data mining.
Okay. Can I just ask, is part of the goal for the time of use to reduce capacity or transmission charges?
To me, I mean, just my personal opinion, you got to try to reduce capacity. That's got to be the main target, right? Because that's that natural 1 hour peak. It's almost a definition of a peak. And I would say, yeah, certainly capacity and yeah, transmission, at least in the summer. You can argue about it in the winter, but to me.
Okay. And just picking little details out here, but the other thing that interests me is the elasticity issue. Mm-hmm. I think you said UFS suggested elasticity of 0.2 or negative 0.2.
That was at a call that was scheduled by Becca a while back. Yeah, I've not done research on it. I'm not saying that's the ultimate number. It's more of a plug-in at the moment, but based on what I've heard, it's right now approximately in the right position somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I mean, if you look at some of the papers that are on the web, and I don't know how authoritative they are necessarily or peer-reviewed, but they're, you know, that number varies quite a bit. And there's also an issue about short-term elasticity versus long-term elasticity.
Yeah.
So that's sort of a critical issue. The elasticity issue is kind of critical in any time of use rate.
Yeah. I was hoping to get some time to look at particularly new studies that when you include technologies like we'll have, as opposed to humans doing things. I think elasticity might be a lot different in that case too. But once I got some time, I was going to try to circle back, or somebody else had time, you know, find out what's going on now in the last few years as far as elasticity studies. Because I think those things 10 or 15, 20 years ago, that's all human intervention, which could be quite different.
Right, right.
Can I ask a question on that?
Michael.
Yeah, thank you. I hear and I saw the 2% number in there, and in the playing around that I did with the workbook, the majority of the sort of behavior modification scenarios said that there would be a 30% or 25% reduction in consumption during these on-peak periods, whether it's essentially daylight hours in the summer or 1 to 7 or 1 to 10, whatever it was, sort of 1 to 7, I think maybe afternoon time. Having looked at my own consumption, Sense Monitor, Belmont Light, Green Button data, et cetera, like I could get a pretty good quantitative sense for what that would actually mean. I find that to be a wildly aggressive reduction in usage for anyone who's willing to say, yeah, I'll turn my air conditioners off for the entire afternoon. So I think, Steve, the asking about the elasticity, I think, is core and central to the assumptions around how well time of use works. So the other recommendation, and this was discussed a little bit previously, is I think the workbook is fantastic, but what would be really helpful is to create some sort of plug and play thing where you say, if people want to go download their own data from Belmont Light, can they just dump that into an Excel file or send it to somebody, and we create a process to do that, to give people the ability to sort of understand how would this impact their own usage. And I realize we're going to hit a small number of people in the town that way, but I think that could be particularly helpful in just sort of broadening the understanding of how that works. So I realize it's more work to create such a tool that would allow that. Maybe it's not. Maybe the workbook, is just delete the data Belmont Light put in there and allow people to dump their own in. But I think having a more sort of hands-on version of that would be a useful thing for people to be able to assess the various scenarios put forward. And we should do that for anything going forward.
I think that's a great suggestion, Michael. I think, I don't know what your experience is getting data off of the Belmont Light site, but I gave up trying to get hourly data for a year. I mean, I spent like a couple hours trying to do it once. And I don't know if it's what I'm doing or if there's something about the system that makes it, but it would be interesting if we could.
It shouldn't be hours. It's clunky, and if you have solar or generation, I assume it's frustrating that it gives you 3 rows for every interval and it doesn't label what those rows are, but it's fairly easy to figure it out. I pulled 6 months worth of data and it took me 10 or 15 minutes. So it's certainly not hours, but it's also something the average person who doesn't care about electricity isn't going to do.
Yeah, it'd be nice if you just hit one button. There goes a year of hourly data, but I don't know if that's possible. But,
All right, well, I guess to be continued. If there's nothing else, we'll move on to approval of meeting minutes. And Chris Henry has got the minutes from May 6th and June 10th to us. The May 6th minutes had some amendments that Michael had suggested. I think I'm fine with that. Is there any discussion? If there's a motion to approve those May 6th, 2020 minutes?
Steve, I just had one question on I guess it's the May minutes. The one that had Michael's addition there.
Yeah.
And the bullet right above that says that Epstein clarified the pilot could be made only out of the current year's surplus and not from other cash reserves. That has subsequently been superseded, right? I wonder what you do with that in a context of minutes. Somebody might be misled by that.
Well, I guess that's the question of what you put down in the minutes, what was said or what was subsequently determined to be different. And I think at the time we all believed that that was true, or at least I did. And yeah, the statement was made. I think the subsequent minutes have clarified that.
Oh, good. Okay.
So I would leave it in, but I understand.
Well, put a footnote pointing to the clarification in the next month. be useful, you think? Just so somebody reading it doesn't get confused.
I just assume leave it the way it is, not put footnotes into the minutes, but
I think the rule with minutes, you just have to live with whatever you said. And
Particularly since it's got your name on it.
well, we believed it to be true at the time until we found out that it wasn't true. All right, can we move to a motion to approve those minutes then as amended? Somebody?
And move to approve the minutes.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, those minutes are approved. Then we go on to the June 10th minutes, which I thought were excellent. Any discussion or about that? I guess we should have a motion first and then the discussion. I'll move to approve those minutes, June 10th, 2020 minutes.
Second.
Any discussion? If none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great. I'll send that approvals back out to Chris, who said he would be filing them with the town clerk or whoever he does it with. Future meetings. Seems to me that we might want to have a meeting in relatively short order to regroup after what we hear from the light board on the 13th. How do people feel about that? And we can also, of course, get into time of use rates.
I support that.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, okay. I mean, I'm not going anywhere this summer, so why should anybody else? So do we want to meet, what's our feeling, the 22nd, the 29th, assuming we stay on the Wednesday schedule?
When's the August light board meeting?
The August light board meeting? I have no idea.
Is it going to be like this? Roy, do you know? Is it going to be the 10th?
I am honestly not sure, but is that the second Wednesday?
That's the second Monday. No, sorry, that's the second Monday.
Second Monday. That, well, yeah, I'm not sure, but I think you're right. So.
Is the light board definitely meeting in August?
I'm not positive where I got it from, but I have it on my calendar for the 24th of August. That
Yeah, I
makes
would
sense.
trust somebody else's calendar at this point. I would reassess that after the meeting on next week, because if there's a prospect of reaching an agreement on what to do with the governance issue that could be presented to town meeting in September, then I would be in favor of meeting in August just to finalize that. But let me reserve judgment until after our meeting on Monday.
Okay. All right, in any case, people have a preference for July 22nd or 29th to get together?
I have a preference for the 22nd. And one of the reasons I was asking about the light board schedule is just if we were going to have like an August 5th meeting, which typically we try to have it before the light board meeting. So maybe, anyway, is that we'd have it every 2 weeks, the 22nd and then August 5th. But we don't know the light board meeting is in August, so maybe we don't worry about that. But of the 22nd and the 29th, I would prefer the 22nd.
Okay,
So would I.
all right. Everybody okay with that? We'll schedule a meeting for the 22nd. And is this time relatively okay with everyone? 7:30? 22nd at 7:30. That's when we'll have our next meeting. Okay, with that, I guess that covers all the agenda items.
Steve, one thing I would mention is we're going to have an announcement, I guess, Monday night, both at the light board and also at the regular select board meeting, that committee appointments are open, and we do need to identify one more candidate for LBAC. So, you know, if anybody on the committee now knows of somebody who might be interested, I welcome them to apply.
Yeah, absolutely. I understand one person has put his name in, and hopefully if others are interested, they will as well. So the last thing is, Chris, this is your swan song in terms of LBAC and Belmont Light. And, you know, we've already thanked you and congratulated you on your new job, but want to do so again. Thanks so much for your help these last 2 years, coming out of what before that, not immediately before that, but a little bit before that was a bad patch. So thank you so much from me, and I assume from everybody on the committee, for all you've done, and best of luck in Shrewsbury.
Geez, no, thank you. And like I've mentioned, I think to a few folks, it's a small world, a small network. Please, I hope to continue being able to converse, perhaps as mutual citizens rather than, you know, in this capacity. But you know, it's been a pleasure. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we may be in touch with you. I don't know. I mean, sure, Craig has everything in is going forward, but maybe we'll be in touch in the future. So thanks so much. Anything else, folks? If not, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I see a second.
Second.
Nodding head second. All in favor?
I
Aye.
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 We'll reconvene back on the 22nd. And for those, I'm going to be tuning in to the light board meeting on the 13th. So others may want to do that as well.
I don't
Can I
see it on.
confirm real quick? 5:30.
Yeah, what's the time?
Start
I don't
time?
see it on the time calendar.
I'm sorry, Travis.
Like Mike, I don't see it on the town calendar. What time is it?
I don't know yet. I don't think the agenda's been posted, and Roy has
That's
just
tomorrow.
left his
Okay.
post, so I'm not sure. So we'll have to check the town calendar tomorrow or as later in the week.
I saw on Belmont Lights page a note 5:30 start time, but that's obviously not the town calendar, and there was no dial-in detailed, so all of that still needs to be confirmed. So I guess it's not helpful.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for others who are listening in, and we'll take it from there.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Steve.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, everybody.